Closer than danger. A Hood Eloquence original story. Chapter 1, The Move. The apartment was smaller than the photos suggested. Not by much. Tisha May had learned long ago that Los Angeles landlords photographed their units the way people photograph their food, with the best light, the most flattering angle, and the deliberate omission of anything that would ruin the appeal. Still, the ceilings were high, the hardwood floors ran clean and quiet under her sneakers, and the windows on the south wall caught the afternoon sun in a way that made the whole room feel warm and honest. She could live with smaller. She set the last box down on the kitchen counter and stood in the middle of the living room with her hands on her hips, breathing. Her locks hung past her shoulders, the copper-reddish strands catching the light the same way the floors did, warm, with just enough shine to make people look twice. She was still in her workout gear from the morning session she'd run at the gym, cropped leggings, a fitted racerback, her feet in fresh white Air Forces. At 25, she had the kind of body that was its own testimony to the discipline she'd spent 20 years building. Lean, functional, centered. Every muscle in her had a reason. "This is it," she said aloud, and the empty apartment carried her voice like a whisper in a church. She wasn't talking about the apartment. She was talking about all of it, the plan she'd been building since she was 19, the savings she'd stacked through early mornings and late bookings, and every extra class she'd taught instead of sleeping in. The new building was 12 minutes from the commercial space she'd been eyeing on Crenshaw. It was cheaper than her old place by $400 a month. $400. Every month. That was money that went directly into the studio fund, into the LLC filing, into the future she could almost touch now when she closed her eyes. She walked to the window and looked out over the courtyard below. The building was a two-story U-shape, 8 units total, an older complex that had been kept up just enough to pass. The courtyard had a concrete bench, a struggling bird of paradise plant someone must have forgotten to water regularly, and a gate that looked like it hadn't latched properly in years. It was nothing fancy. It was everything she needed it to be. Her phone buzzed on the counter. "Deon, you need hands? Got Marcus and Lil Chris on standby." She smiled before she could stop herself. "Tisha, already done. Told you I had it." "Deon, you always say that." "Tisha, because it's always true." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Deon, bring your stubborn self some food at least. We're at Roscoe's in 40. She typed a quick no 3 times before deleting it each time. She was hungry. She hadn't eaten since 5 a.m. "Tisha, fine. 40 minutes. She was in the bathroom splashing water on her face when she heard footsteps on the walkway outside her door, heavy, unhurried, with a deliberate quality to them, like someone who walked that way on purpose. She straightened, patting her face dry, and by the time the knock came she had already moved to the door. She opened it. The man standing in the hallway was tall enough to fill the frame without quite touching it. He was 45, maybe, with skin so dark it looked almost blue in the shade of the walkway overhang, a deep, saturated tone that reminded her of deep water at night. His eyes were the thing that registered first, though. They were nearly black, and so still they didn't look like they blinked on any natural human schedule. He wore a collared shirt tucked into pressed slacks, and he held a manila envelope in one hand like it was a prop he'd remembered to bring at the last second. "Miss May." His voice was low and even and carried no inflection that would indicate a question versus a statement. "Tommy Page. I own the building. Mr. Page." She kept the door at a 45-degree angle. Not rude. Not inviting. "I was about to head out. Won't take long." He extended the envelope. "Copy of your lease, emergency contact form, building rules. I like to deliver these personally. Make sure we understand each other. Make sure we understand each other." An odd way to put it. She took the envelope. "I already signed everything with the management company. I like the personal touch." His eyes moved past her, just briefly, just enough to take in the boxes, the open space, the particular way her furniture was arranged, and then returned to her face. The smile he produced was the kind that involved the mouth and nothing above it. "You settling in all right?" "I'm good." She held his gaze. 20 years of martial arts training meant she didn't flinch from things that made her uncomfortable. She just noted them. Filed them. "Thank you for the paperwork." He stood there 1 beat too long. Then he nodded, slow. "You need anything at all, I'm in Unit 1. Right below you." She watched him walk back down the stairs with those same deliberate, unhurried steps. Something in her spine tightened. Not fear. Not yet. Just the quiet, careful alertness she'd learned to trust. She closed the door and stood in her own kitchen for a moment, very still, listening to the sound of his footsteps fade. Then she grabbed her keys and went to meet her people. Chapter 2, Roscoe's Table. Deon Jenkins had a way of taking up space that had nothing to do with his size. He was 6'1", broad through the shoulders, the kind of build that came from actually working out rather than just lifting for aesthetics. He was 30 years old, deep-complexioned with warm undertones and a low cut he kept clean, and he laughed easily and often, but never carelessly. There was always something deliberate behind his eyes, a quality of attention that Tisha had noticed when they were barely out of high school and filed away somewhere she hadn't revisited in a long time. He was already at the table when she walked in, sitting across from Marcus Webb and Chris Okafor, three grown men looking ridiculous sharing a corner booth. A plate of waffles sat untouched in front of Deon's empty seat across from him, steam still rising. "She actually came," Marcus said, grinning. "I said I was coming. You said fine like you were doing us a favor." Chris slid over to make room. "I was." She sat down and pulled the waffles toward her without asking. "These mine?" "Obviously," Deon said. She looked at him. He was already looking at her, the way he always was when she walked into a room, which she'd trained herself to file under. That's just how Deon is. He's attentive. He's like that with everyone. She poured syrup. "So, how's the new place?" Marcus asked. He was 28 and worked at the facility where she taught front desk, scheduling, the operational brain behind her creative chaos. He was also one of the most genuinely decent people she knew. "It's good. Quiet neighborhood. Close to the Crenshaw spot." She cut into a waffle. "The landlord gave me a weird vibe though." "Weird how?" Deon's voice shifted subtle, but she caught it. That attention behind his eyes sharpened. "He came to introduce himself personally." "Which, fine. But he looked around my apartment while he was talking to me." She paused. "Just for a second. But he did it." "What's his name?" "Tommy Page." Deon picked up his phone. "Don't," she said. "I'm just..." "Deon." She gave him a look. "I'm not 16. I noted it. I'll handle it if it becomes something." He put the phone down. But she saw him set it face up, like he wanted to remember the name. "How much longer on the studio timeline?" Chris asked, staring. She felt the tension in her chest ease slightly. This was her favorite subject. 11 months if the city processes my permits in a reasonable window, which is optimistic. 13, more realistically. I've got everything else. I just need the paper, the contractor, and the last tier of capital. The last tier being about 40,000. Silence around the table. "Not the heavy kind, the respectful kind." "You're really doing it," Marcus said quietly. "I've always been doing it." She smiled, and it was a real one, the kind that came from somewhere private and certain in her. "I've been doing it since I was 19 and watching other people's studios instead of owning one. I'm just almost done now." Deon watched her say it. The way she held herself when she talked about the studio was different from any other posture she carried, the slight lift in her chin, the settled quality in her shoulders, the way her eyes went a little soft and a little fierce at the same time. He'd seen her face down opponents twice her size without blinking. He'd seen her hold herself through her grandmother's passing without letting anyone see her break. But this particular expression, was his favorite version of her, and he knew better than to say so. He picked up his coffee instead. "To Tisha May," Chris said, raising his glass. 12 months from now, you'll be standing in your own building." She touched her glass to his. 11, she said. "I'm being optimistic." Chapter 3, Unit 1. Shirley Green had lived in apartment 1 for 3 years. She was 56 years old with a round face and eyes that had learned to be careful before the rest of her had. She'd been beautiful once in the way that photographs proved. There were a few still tucked in a shoebox under her bed. A younger Shirley in bright colors with her head thrown back, laughing at something off camera. That woman still existed somewhere inside her. She could feel her occasionally, in moments of unexpected warmth, a song on the radio, a phone call from her sister in Atlanta, the smell of gardenias when she walked past the flower stand on Century. But that woman had learned to stay quiet since Tommy. She heard the new girl come in on a Saturday, heard the boxes scraping across the floor upstairs, heard young feet moving through the space above her with an energy that felt like something she used to have. She stood at her kitchen window and watched the girl cross the courtyard to her car, compact, copper-skinned, locks swinging, moving with a precision that came from her body trusting itself completely, and Shirley felt something move in her chest. Not envy. Something older than that. Something that felt like a warning she didn't have the right words for yet. "Who's that?" She hadn't heard Tommy come up behind her. She never heard him. It was something he cultivated, the ability to simply appear, to be present without announcement. She managed not to startle visibly. She'd learned that too. "New tenant." She stepped away from the window. Unit 4. She didn't look at his face. She didn't need to see what was there. She could feel it, that particular quality of stillness he got when something caught his interest. It had a temperature. Like the air before a storm. "I introduced myself," he said. "I know." She moved to the stove and stirred something that didn't need stirring. "Dinner in 20 minutes. He didn't respond. She heard him settle into his chair by the window, heard the particular creak of the wood that she'd memorized along with every other sound this apartment made. And she kept her back to him and breathed slowly and thought about her sister in Atlanta and the way the gardenias smelled on Century Boulevard in the morning. She started thinking about leaving that night. Not for the first time, but for the first time in a while, the thought had some weight to it. Chapter 4. Familiar Gravity. The thing about having a best friend who was in love with you was that you had to not know. Or at least, you had to hold what you knew at a very careful distance, in a room inside yourself that you didn't visit too often, because the moment you let it become real, the moment you stood in it and let it mean something, everything shifted. And Tisha May had worked very hard to keep things exactly as they were. Deon had been in her life since they were 17, when they'd ended up in the same Kenpo class and spent 45 minutes trying to one-up each other in sparring drills until the instructor sent them to opposite corners. They'd laughed about it afterward in the parking lot, and something had clicked into place with the ease of things that were always supposed to happen. He'd been her person ever since. Through college, through grief, through the slow construction of her professional life. He knew things about her that she hadn't told anyone else, and she knew the same about him. What she wouldn't let herself know, or wouldn't fully acknowledge, was the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. She was paying attention. She just wasn't ready to do anything with it. He showed up at the new apartment 3 weeks after she moved in, on a Tuesday evening with a toolbox and the particular ease of someone who had been granted access to a person's space long enough that showing up didn't require an announcement. "Your bathroom faucet drips," he said, walking past her into the hallway. "How do you know that?" "You mentioned it last week." "I mentioned it in passing." "So?" He was already in the bathroom, crouching under the sink with a wrench. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded and watched him work, and there was something so characteristically Deon about the whole thing, the quiet competence, the way he did things without requiring acknowledgement for doing them, that she had to look at the ceiling for a second. "You didn't have to come over here for that," she said. "I know." A clank of metal. "Hand me that towel." She handed it to him. Their fingers touched for half a second. "You eating?" he asked from under the sink. "I was about to make something." "What something?" "Something that was going to involve eggs and whatever I have left." "Sit down. I'll cook when I finish this." She wanted to argue. She stood in her own hallway for a moment, looking at the back of his neck and the set of his shoulders under his shirt, and she felt the familiar pull of that thing she didn't name. And she turned and went to sit on her couch before it got any more complicated than that. He made pasta with the chicken she had in the freezer and a lemon garlic sauce from things she hadn't known she had in the back of her pantry. And they sat on the floor of her still not fully furnished living room with their backs against the couch and ate with the kind of ease that only came from years of accumulated comfort. "Marcus told me you've been picking up extra clients," he said. 5 new training bookings this month. That's on top of your regular classes? The studio doesn't fund itself." He looked at her sidelong. You're already running yourself at 110%. 115, but I'm pacing." "You're not pacing. You're stacking." "Deon. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying." She kept her voice even, not unkind. "And I hear it. But I'm 11 months out from something I've been building for 6 years. I'm not slowing down now. When it's done, I'll rest." He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him choosing his next words carefully, the way he always did when she'd drawn a line. "Okay," he said finally. "Then let me know what I can do." That was Deon. That was always Deon. He never pushed past where she stopped him. He just repositioned, moved to where he could still be useful, still be close, still be exactly what she needed without making her feel managed or watched. She ate her pasta and told herself that was just the kind of friend he was. Chapter 5. The Corridor. There was a man she walked past every morning. He was always in the same place, seated on a folding chair outside the laundry room door at the back of the ground floor, reading a newspaper that he never seemed to turn a page on. He was 60 or close to it, slight-built, skin ashy gray-brown, with a thin mustache and eyes that never quite met hers. He wore the same brown jacket regardless of temperature. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his unit number. "Who's the man by the laundry?" she asked Marcus one afternoon when he stopped by after his shift. Marcus shrugged. "Old dude? He's always there. He watches me when I leave in the morning." "People watch you when you leave anywhere. Have you looked at yourself?" "Marcus. I'm serious, though. You've seen something specific." "Not specific. Just," she stopped. "A feeling." "Trust it," he said, without irony. He'd known her long enough to know her instincts were not the anxious kind. She nodded. She started leaving through the front entrance instead of the back. What she didn't know, the man's name was Earl Briggs. He'd lived in Unit 6 for 11 years. He was a retired bus driver who spent his mornings the same way every day and had, since the moment Tisha May walked into the courtyard with her first box, begun to restructure that routine around her comings and goings. He tracked her schedule the way other men tracked sports seasons, with patience, with retention, with a low-grade obsession he had no framework for recognizing as dangerous because he'd never acted on it. Not yet. He just liked to see her. Just like to know when she was home. He told himself it wasn't anything. He told himself that every morning. Chapter 6. Shirley leaves. It happened on a Wednesday. Tisha was coming home from a late client session, her bag over one shoulder, keys already out, a habit from years of being a woman moving through the world after dark, when she heard the sound from below. Not loud. That was the thing. It wasn't screaming, wasn't the crash of furniture. It was quieter than that and far worse, the low, controlled sound of someone trying not to make noise while something was being done to them. She stopped on the staircase. Then the door to Unit 1 opened and Shirley Green came out. She was moving fast, a bag on each shoulder, a purse tucked under her arm, keys gripped in one hand. She had on a cardigan that was slightly too small, like she'd grabbed it off the wrong hook in the dark, and there was a quality to her movement that Tisha recognized from training the focused, forward-only motion of someone who had made a decision and was keeping their body from reconsidering it. Their eyes met in the stairwell. Shirley paused. Just for a beat. "Miss," Tisha started. "Don't," Shirley said. Quietly. Firmly. Her voice was surprisingly steady. "Just don't stop me." "I'm not going to stop you." Tisha stepped aside. Completely. "Is there anything you need?" Shirley looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes were dry and very clear, the eyes of someone who had been deciding this for months and had simply picked tonight. There was a small dark bruise beginning at her left jawline that she hadn't tried to cover. "Pray for me," Shirley said, and walked out the gate. Tisha stood in the stairwell for a full minute after the woman disappeared. She listened to the courtyard go quiet. She listened to the absence from Unit 1, no voice, no movement, nothing. She went upstairs, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared at the floor. The man below her had done that. The man with the still eyes and the unhurried footsteps who had stood in her doorway and said, "Make sure we understand each other." She understood something now. She just wished she didn't. Chapter 7. What was already there? She called Deon at 11:30 at night. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, were you asleep?" "No." No hesitation. "What's wrong?" She told him about Shirley, the bags, the bruise, the stillness in the courtyard after. She told him about the feeling she'd had since Tommy Page stood in her doorway on move-in day. She told him things she hadn't said aloud yet because saying them made them more real, and she'd been hoping reality would choose a different shape. Deon listened the way he always listened, completely, without interjecting, without softening it before she was done. "Okay," he said, when she'd finished. "Okay. I'm coming over." "Deon, it's almost midnight." "I know what time it is." His voice was calm and certain. "I'm coming over. You don't have to let me in if you don't want to, but I'll be there." She sat with the phone against her ear for a long moment. "Okay," she said. He arrived in 22 minutes with a hoodie on and nothing in his hands, and when she opened the door she saw the specific quality of presence he carried, not agitation, not hero energy, just a settled, grounded alertness that said, "I am here. And here is enough." They sat on her couch with the lights low and talked for 2 hours. About Shirley. About the studio. About the careful math of her life and what it cost to protect something while you were still building it. At some point the conversation became lighter, older memories, shared ones, the running catalog of their history that they'd been adding to for 13 years. He fell asleep around 2 a.m. sitting up on her couch, his head tilted back and his breathing slow and even. She should have woken him up. She should have gotten him a blanket and gone to her room. Instead, she sat for a while and looked at him. At the particular piece of his sleeping face. At the hands in his lap that had fixed her faucet without being asked. At the 13 years of him showing up, consistently, in exactly the way she'd needed each time, as if he had some quiet internal compass oriented in her direction. She thought, "I already know." She thought, "I have always already known." Then she got up, got a blanket, laid it over him without waking him, and went to her room and lay on top of her covers and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Chapter 8. Tommy without Shirley. She was gone by the time he woke up. Tommy Page stood in his apartment in the gray morning light, looking at the spaces where Shirley had been. The good dishes she'd brought. The photograph she'd kept on the bookshelf gone. The smell of her hair oil that had become part of the air in this place. Gone. He stood in the kitchen where she used to make his coffee without being asked and felt something move through him that he wouldn't have called grief, because grief was passive and what he felt was anything but. He sat in his chair by the window. He looked up at the ceiling. Unit 4 was directly above him. He knew her schedule now, 6 a.m. departure, evening returns that varied by day. He knew the sound of her footsteps, the particular rhythm of them, purposeful and even. He'd been cataloging her without naming what he was doing as cataloging. He told himself he was a good landlord. Attentive. Invested in his property and the people in it. He sat in the quiet his apartment had become and let his eyes track across the ceiling. Then he got up, very calmly, and began to think about what he could do about the water heater in Unit 4. It had been making a sound lately. Or it would be. He was good at fixing things. He just needed a reason to be where he needed to be. Chapter 9. Maintenance. He knocked on her door on a Thursday morning when he knew she'd just come back from her first class. She answered in a fresh tank top and sweats, her locks up, clearly just showered. The slight wariness in her eyes when she registered who was at the door, she covered it quickly, but he saw it, and something in him noted it with a satisfaction he kept off his face. Water heater's been making noise, he said. Building-wide issue. I need to check the connection in your utility closet. I haven't heard anything. It's intermittent. Won't take 5 minutes. She waited. He watched her do it. Leave the door open, she said, and stepped aside. He smiled and moved through her space like he belonged in it. Which he did, technically. Which she couldn't argue. That was the whole design. He took his time with the utility closet. He noted the layout of her apartment, the stack of business documents on her dining table with the word studio visible on the top sheet. The framed photo on the bookshelf, her and a group of people, one of them a tall man standing beside her with his hand at the small of her back. He noted the man's face. He noted the position of the hand. All good, he said when he came back out, and he said it looking at her directly, the way he always did, with those still eyes that blinked on their own schedule. Thank you, she said. She was standing near the open door. She had not moved from near the open door the entire time. Smart girl, he thought. He walked out without another word and went back downstairs and sat in his chair and thought about the man in the photograph for a while. She called the management company the next morning and asked what the policy was on unannounced maintenance visits. He's the owner, the woman on the phone told her, in the flat tone of someone who'd had this conversation before. He has right of entry for legitimate maintenance. With notice. 24 hours, yes. Did he not provide? Thank you, Tisha said, and hung up. She opened a new note on her phone and started a log. Date. Time. Visit. Duration. What he said. What she observed. What her body registered that her brain might later try to rationalize away. She was not going to rationalize anything away. Chapter 10. The Shift. It happened at the gym on a Saturday. She and Deon had been sparring partners for 13 years, which meant they knew each other's bodies in the specific, technical way of people who had spent hundreds of hours learning where the other one was strong and where they were not. Sparring with Deon was one of the few physical experiences she had that felt completely mutual. He matched her without condescending, challenged her without performing. And the communication between their bodies in the ring was so practiced it operated below language. They were going light. Cool-down rounds after a full session, barely contact, mostly form and footwork. He caught her wrist on a deflected combination and held it, just for a fraction of a second, just a microsecond longer than the drill required, and she looked up at him. He was already looking at her. They were close. The way you got close in a ring without thinking about it, because proximity was functional. But in that fraction of a second, with his hand around her wrist and his eyes on her face, proximity stopped being functional and became something else. She stepped back. He let go. Neither of them said anything. They finished the round in silence and then spent 10 minutes on stretching with a careful, mutual distance between them that hadn't been there before. She drove home with both hands on the wheel and the windows down and let the wind be loud enough to crowd out the thing that kept trying to form in her chest. She thought about calling him when she got home. She thought about what she'd say. Hey, what was that? Hey, I need to know if I've been lying to myself. Hey, I think I'm in love with you and I'm terrified of what happens to us if I say it out loud. She put her phone face down on the counter and made tea instead. Chapter 11. Closer. He showed up the next evening without a text first, which he'd never done before. She opened the door, and he was standing there in the low orange light of early evening with his hands in his pockets and that look on his face, the one he usually kept aimed at a middle distance when she wasn't watching, turned fully toward her. I need to say something, he said. Deon. Let me say it. She moved aside. He came in. They stood in her living room, and she watched him gather himself the way she'd watched him gather himself before hard things, the same quality of stillness, the same particular set of his jaw. I have been in love with you since we were 22 years old, he said. And I know you know that. And I know why you haven't, he stopped. Started again. I'm not here to pressure you into anything. I'm not asking you to feel something you don't feel. But I can't keep pretending I don't know what I know, and I think, Tisha, I think after yesterday you can't either. The apartment was very quiet. I'm scared, she said. It came out simply, without preamble, the way the truth did when you'd spent too much energy holding it back. Of what specifically? Of losing you. If we try and it, she shook her head. You are the most important person in my life. And I have kept that fact at arm's length because if I stand directly in it and look at it, it becomes something I have to act on, and I didn't know if I was ready. He crossed the room. He didn't touch her, just stood close, in the particular gravity of the space between them that had always felt slightly different from any other space. Are you ready now? He asked. She looked at him. At the 13 years of him. At the faucet he'd fixed, and the pasta he'd made, and the blanket she'd laid over him while he slept. At the wrist he'd held in the ring for one fraction of a second too long because his body had told the truth when his mouth wasn't ready to. "I think I've been ready," she said. "I think I just didn't want to admit it." He touched her face. Just his hand against her jaw, gentle and certain, like something he'd rehearsed in private for years. She leaned into it. "Okay," he said softly. "Then here we are." "Here we are," she agreed. Chapter 12. What they made. It was slow and it was sure, the way things are when they've been a long time coming. There was no performance in it, no nervousness, no the weight of this is new. Because it wasn't new, not really, it was just the completion of something that had always existed between them, finally given the shape and the language and the touch it had always wanted. She'd been afraid of it, and then she was in it, and the fear dissolved the way fear always did when the thing you feared turned out to be exactly what you needed. Afterward, they lay in the particular quiet of her room, the city doing its low hum outside her window, his arm across her back and her face turned toward the ceiling. "I should have told you a long time ago," he said. "I wasn't ready a long time ago." "How do you know?" "Because I wasn't done being scared yet." She turned to look at him. "I'm still a little scared." "I know." He met her eyes. "Me too." "Good," she said. "That means it's real." She laid her head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat, and outside, the city kept its hum, and somewhere below them, the floor of her apartment bore the weight of the night like every other night, and no one was watching. Or so they believed. Chapter 13. The Feed. Tommy Page had not planned to put a camera in Unit 4. He told himself that, clearly, on the Tuesday evening 3 weeks prior when he'd gone up to address the smoke detector that had, according to his own assessment, required replacement. He told himself that was all he was there for. He'd told himself this even as his hands, operating with a calm that existed entirely separately from whatever was happening in his chest, had installed a device the size of a thumbnail behind the new smoke detector housing, angled toward the center of the room. He told himself a lot of things. He watched the feed from his phone, late, in his chair by the window. The angle caught the living room, the hallway leading to the bedroom. He watched her come home tired and watched her sit on her floor to stretch. He watched the tall man come over and watched them eat together and watched the small geographic shifts between them that told him what he needed to know before either of them had said it out loud. He'd watched them that night. He watched the feed until his phone screen was too bright for the dark room he sat in, and then he set it down and sat very still for a long time. Then he stood up. Then he put his fist through the drywall beside the bookcase. Then he stood looking at the hole for a moment, breathing. Then he went to bed. He lay in the dark and the thing inside him reorganized itself, the quiet obsession becoming something with edges, the watching becoming wanting, the wanting becoming a calculation. She had been his. In the logic of the universe he'd built inside himself, she had always been moving toward him. This was a detour. This was an obstacle. He was very good at removing obstacles. He'd done it before. Chapter 14. Small Fires. The first thing was Deon's car. He found it on a Wednesday morning when he'd come to take Tisha to breakfast, the passenger side tires flat, not from road debris. Valve stems. Clean, deliberate. He crouched beside the car and looked at it for a moment with the particular stillness of a man who was assembling information. This wasn't an accident, he told Tisha. How do you know? Both tires. Same side. Valve stems unscrewed, not punctured. He stood up. Someone did this on purpose. She was very quiet. She looked at the tires and then at the building behind them. How long was your car outside? Since last night. She looked at Unit 1. The curtain in the window moved slightly. We need to call the police, she said. For flat tires, T. They're going to. For documentation. Her voice was flat and certain. We file a report. We make it official. That matters later. He looked at her. He heard the later and understood what it implied. This was already a series to her, not a first incident. He felt something cold settle in his chest. Talk to me, he said. She told him about the maintenance visits, all 3 of them now, the log she'd been keeping. The smoke detector replacement she'd thought was strange, but hadn't been able to articulate why until she'd stood in the hallway afterward and felt the particular quality of having been surveilled. She told him about the feeling that had been building since move-in day. She told him about Shirley Green's face in the stairwell. He listened to all of it without interrupting. I want you to come stay at my place, he said, when she was done. I'm not running. Tisha. I have 11 months left on this lease and $40,000 saved into this building and a studio I'm a year from opening. I am not letting some, she stopped. Breathed. I am not going anywhere. But I hear you and I'm not doing this alone. We figure it out together. Okay. He looked at her long enough to understand that she meant it. Okay, he said. Together. Chapter 15. The Pattern. The smoke detector in her bedroom went off at 2 in the morning on a Saturday, shrieking her out of sleep with a sound that turned her body to adrenaline before her mind was fully present. She was up and moving before she consciously decided to move, through the door, scanning the hallway, the kitchen, checking for actual smoke with her eyes and her nose, and the particular clarity of a trained body that had run threat response drills since childhood. Nothing burning. No smoke. No heat. False alarm. Or not false. Triggered. There was a difference. She stood in her living room at 2 in the morning with her heart rate slowing and her mind very clear and thought about the smoke detector Tommy Page had replaced 3 weeks ago. She called Deon. "I need you to help me find something," she said, when he picked up. He was there in 30 minutes. They spent 45 minutes looking. Deon found it, the device behind the smoke detector housing, the kind of thing that looked like a component of the unit if you weren't looking for something else. Neither of them spoke for a long moment after he held it up. "He's been watching me," she said. Her voice was entirely steady. "Yeah. How long?" "Since the smoke detector replacement." 6 weeks, maybe. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of her sleeping in this apartment, moving through it, thinking she was alone. 6 weeks of him watching. She thought about the night she and Deon had. Her expression didn't change, but something moved through her that was cold and furious and very, very controlled. "Don't touch it," she said. "Leave it exactly where it is. Tisha, we should. Leave it." She met his eyes. "We leave it, we document it, and we let him keep watching a very boring apartment while I figure out exactly how to make sure he answers for this." Deon looked at her for a long moment. This was the version of her he had always found most formidable, not the physical precision, not the competitive fire, but this, the cold, strategic patience of someone who didn't act until the timing was right. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I need you to help me find Shirley Green." Chapter 16. Shirley's account. It took 4 days. Marcus found her first, a cousin in Inglewood who Shirley had gone to stay with, a sister network of women who knew how to make people temporarily invisible when they needed to be. Shirley met them at a diner on La Brea. She arrived in a yellow blouse with her hair pressed and her spine straight, and she sat down across from Tisha with the eyes of someone who had already made peace with telling the truth. "I knew he'd do it again," she said. Not toward Tisha specifically. Toward the air between them. "Has he hurt other women?" Tisha asked. "Before me. I knew it when we got together." "I thought," Shirley stopped. Let out a slow breath. "I thought I was different. I thought I could manage it. You know how we tell ourselves things." "Yes," Tisha said quietly. "I know. He watches them." Shirley's hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "Whatever building he owns, whatever tenant catches his attention, he watches them. He finds reasons to be in their space. He has ways of making things go wrong so he can be the one to fix them." "Has anyone reported him?" "Twice that I know of. Both times it didn't go anywhere. Nothing that happened was technically illegal by the time the police looked at it. He's patient. He's very, very patient." Tisha nodded slowly. "Will you make a statement?" Shirley looked at her for a long time. "He put me in the hospital," she said finally. 2 years ago. I told them I fell." A pause. "I'm done telling that story." "Then tell the real one," Tisha said gently. "Tell it to someone who can use it." Shirley looked at the table. Then she looked up, and her eyes were clear and very determined. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Who do I talk to?" Chapter 17. Escalation. He knew something had changed. He didn't know how he knew. The feed from Unit 4 had become boring in the days since, deliberately boring in a way that had its own quality, the ordinariness of someone performing ordinariness, but he knew. He could feel it in the air of the building the way you felt weather changing. He left a note on her door. "Water pressure issue. Will need access Friday morning." She texted back, "Will not be available Friday. Please provide 24 hours notice per lease terms." Per lease terms. He read those 3 words 4 times. The fire was small, a pile of cardboard in the stairwell that caught at 3 a.m. and set off the building alarm and brought 3 units out into the courtyard in their night clothes. Tommy stood among them in his bathrobe looking appropriately alarmed, and when the fire department came and ruled it suspicious, but contained, he told the investigator he had no idea how it could have started. Tisha stood in the courtyard in her hoodie and sweats and looked at him across the space between them. He met her gaze. She pulled out her phone and added an entry to the log. He saw her do it. Something shifted in his chest, the cold space where patience used to live narrowing, constricting. He'd built his whole system on being the one with information. On watching without being watched. On moving slowly, precisely, within legal margins, because that was what had always protected him. She was watching him. He could not tolerate being watched. Chapter 18. The trap is set. Attorney Renata Cole had taken 6 of Tommy Page's previous cases for harassment, 2 assault, and had watched them dissolve through lack of evidence, recanting witnesses and the patient, methodical way Page operated at the legal margin. She listened to Tisha's log, Shirley Green's statement, and the photos of the camera device with the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for exactly this. "The camera is a felony," she said. "Invasion of privacy." We have documentation of the installation via his own maintenance logs. We have Shirley's statement on record. We have your incident log going back to move-in day. Will it be enough? Combined with what we're about to build, yes. Renata set down the folder. The key is to keep him escalating while we're documenting. He's not going to stop. Men like this don't stop. So we let him move, and every time he moves we add a layer. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you are never alone in that building. Renata met her eyes. I mean that literally. Camera in your entryway, someone you trust with a key, and you tell me the moment anything changes. Tisha nodded. She was thinking about the studio, about 11 months, about $40,000, about the future she'd built brick by brick through every single early morning of her 20s. She was not going to let Tommy Page take this from her. She was not going to run. She was going to make him answer for every single thing he'd done. One more thing, Renata said. Is there anyone else in that building he might move against? Tisha thought about the man by the laundry room. About the name she still didn't know. About the newspaper he never turned a page on. There might be, she said. I'm looking into it. Chapter 19, Earl. His name was Earl Briggs. Marcus found it through the building directory, a 10-year tenant, Unit 6, retired MTA. He spent his mornings in the corridor by the laundry room because the morning light came through the back window there, and it was the warmest spot in the building between 7 and 9 a.m. He had mild cataracts that hadn't been treated yet and sat close to whatever he was reading, which was why his eyes always appeared fixed on a middle distance. He wasn't watching her. He just sat in the warmest spot in the building every morning and couldn't quite see clearly, and Tisha May's silhouette moved through his peripheral vision with a brightness he didn't know how to account for, so he'd started sitting there earlier. She stood in her kitchen with this information and felt the particular vertigo of realizing a fear was the wrong shape. She thought, he's just a lonely old man who likes the morning light. She thought, and I have been so deep in watching for danger that I almost made him into a part of it. She went downstairs the next morning and introduced herself. His name was Earl. He'd worked the Wilshire line for 30 years. His cataracts were scheduled for surgery in the spring. He'd been a widow for 4 years. She started bringing him coffee on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. It was the right thing. It also made her feel human again, in a period when everything had the quality of a confrontation. Chapter 20, the night it came apart. He planned it for a Friday. He knew she'd be home. He'd been watching her schedule even without the feed, piecing it together from what he could observe from Unit 1. He knew the tall man spent weekends. He knew she ran early and returned by 8. He knew the building was generally quiet on Friday evenings. He'd bought things. Things that could be explained away. Things that existed just inside the margin of what a landlord might plausibly do. He was very good at existing inside margins. He came up the stairs at 9:15 with a key he had every legal right to carry and a story he'd rehearsed about the circuit breaker for the floor. He was 3 steps from her door when it opened. Tisha stood in the doorway. Not surprised. Not reactive. Just present. Looking at him with those clear, steady eyes and a quality of stillness in her posture that registered, somewhere below his conscious thinking, as a warning. Mr. Page. Miss May. I need to. I know you have a camera in my smoke detector, she said. The hallway went very quiet. He didn't move. He was very good at not moving. I don't know what you're. I know about the 2 prior harassment reports. I know about Shirley Green's hospital visit 2 years ago. I know about the valve stems on my boyfriend's tires and the cardboard fire in the stairwell. She held his gaze. I have documentation on all of it. My attorney has documentation on all of it. And 2 LAPD officers are in my living room right now who would very much like to speak with you. He stood in the hallway with his carefully constructed story dissolving in his mouth like paper. She had not raised her voice. She had not moved from the doorway. She stood 5 feet tall in the hallway of her own apartment with 13 years of martial arts training and 6 weeks of deliberate, precise documentation and a year of her life she was not going to let anyone take from her. And she looked at Tommy Page the way she'd always looked at things that tried to intimidate her, without flinching. You're going to want to come inside, she said. Or you can wait there. Either way, this is done. The door behind her opened wider and 2 uniformed officers stepped into the frame. Tommy Page stood very still for a long moment. Then, for the first time since she'd known him, he took a step backward. Epilogue, 9 months later. The studio opened on a Saturday. She'd pushed the timeline by 2 months, not from setbacks, but from additions. A second training room she hadn't originally planned for, a wall of mirrors that ran the length of the main floor, a sound system that her instructor 15 years ago would have wept over. She'd spent the 2 extra months getting it exactly right, and standing in the middle of it on opening morning with the light coming through the front windows and her name on the glass, and the smell of fresh paint still faint in the air. She thought that the 2 months had been worth every day. The building on Crenshaw was hers. The LLC was hers. The business she'd built from 6 a.m. mornings and delayed gratification, and the absolute refusal to be deterred was hers. Deon was the first one through the door. "You're early," she said. "I know." He looked around the space, took it in the way he took in everything that mattered to him, slowly, fully, like he was memorizing it. "Tisha. Don't. I'm not going to cry. You were about to." "I was not about to," he stopped. Pressed his lips together. Looked at the ceiling. "Maybe a little." She crossed the floor and hugged him, really hugged him, the way she'd learned to do again over the last 9 months, with the particular fullness of someone who'd stopped managing her own love at arm's length. "Thank you," she said into his shoulder. "For all of it. You did this. We did the rest. The parts before this." She pulled back and looked at him. "I mean that." He kissed her forehead. Simple and sure. Tommy Page was awaiting trial on felony invasion of privacy charges, 2 counts of stalking, and once Shirley Green's official statement was on record, 1 count of domestic violence. Renata Cole had told Tisha it was the most complete documentation she'd seen on a case like this in 15 years of practice. The camera had been the anchor. Every subsequent charge had been built around it. Shirley Green had moved into her sister's place in Atlanta and, according to a text she'd sent Tisha the week before, had started taking a pottery class on Wednesday afternoons and had recently eaten at a restaurant alone for the first time in 6 years. "It's terrifying," Shirley had written, and also completely wonderful. "I thought you should know." Tisha had read it twice and smiled both times. By noon the studio was full. Marcus ran the front desk with the ease of someone who had been planning this alongside her and knew exactly what needed to happen and when. Chris had brought a speaker and someone's playlist, and the energy in the room had that particular quality of things beginning, the specific warmth of people gathered around something new that also felt, somehow, like it had always been there. Earl Briggs came by at 1 o'clock in a pressed shirt with his cataract surgery 3 weeks behind him and his eyes clear, seeing everything. She'd invited him herself. He stood in the doorway of the studio with his hands in his pockets and looked at the space, and then at her and said, "You built something real, young lady." "I had help," she said. "You let it." He nodded, once, the way old men nodded when they were being serious. "That's yours. Nobody can take that." She watched him find a seat near the window, the warmest spot in the room, the good light, and she thought, nobody can take this. She'd proven it. She'd held the line across a year of difficulty and fear and love and uncertainty, and she had held it, and here was what holding it had made. Here was the thing she'd built. Hers. At the end of the night, when the last of the guests had gone and the studio was quiet and she was locking up, Deon sat on the floor of the main room with his back against the mirror wall and watched her move through the space, turning off lights. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about the next one," she said. He laughed. Low and warm. "Of course you are. A second location. Somewhere in Leimert Park, maybe. Give it 2 years. 2 years. I'm being realistic this time." He shook his head, still smiling. She turned off the last light and the room went to the quiet amber of the street lamps through the front windows, and she crossed the floor and sat down beside him against the mirror, their shoulders touching. The city hummed outside, doing what it always did, indifferent and relentless and full of possibility. She leaned her head against his shoulder. 2 years, she said again, quietly. "Like a promise." "I'll be here," he said. She closed her eyes. She believed him. The end. Subscribe for more Hood Tales, and don't forget to press the like button.